Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar featuring Jason Pavluchuk to discuss MAP-21 and TDM. My name is Phil Winters. I'm the director of the TDM program here at the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. Today's web conference is being co-sponsored by the Association for Commuter Transportation, and which is holding its annual conference next week in Savannah, Georgia, and our National Center for Transit Research, which is the home to the National TDM and Telework Clearinghouse, including the 2,100-member TDM listserv. We're also the home of Best Workplaces for Commuters. Just kind of give you a quick rundown of today's agenda. After this welcome and kind of introductions, we'll do a couple little polling questions to set the stage. Then we'll jump in and have Jason give us an insight into MAP-21 and TDM, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A questions from you. If you've seen it before, you will be aware at the top of your screen you should see a Q&A tab. You click on that, you can type in your question, and we'll pull questions from there. Let me introduce today's speaker, and then I'll go to the polls, and then we'll get started. Jason Pavulchuk is the founder of Pavulchuk Associates, a Washington government affairs firm which provides its clients with legislative and policy solutions, specializing in transportation, energy, environment, and tax issues. He is a political tactician renowned for developing successful legislative strategies for both funding and policy issues, and Jason has published numerous studies on the tactics of interest groups in legislative politics. He also sits on the Gehrman-Leerson Board of Advisors for Transportation Issues and serves on the advisory committee of the House Livable Communities Task Force. He's a proud graduate of the George Washington University. Okay, let's jump in quickly to a couple of the polling questions just to get an idea. You check the little round circles next to the colored boxes. What region of the country you're located? Thank you. All right. Give it a little bit more time. All right, we're going to share the results. Looks like we have representation from all parts of the country. Let's look at the polls. Approximately, including yourself, certainly, how many people are viewing today's web location? A few more seconds here. All right, I'm going to close the polls now. Looks like 3/4 are just viewing it by themselves. That's fine. Thank you. Also, speaking of the Association for Commuter Transportation, how many are attending next week's annual conference in Savannah? There will be additional information, of course, about MAP-21 there. We realize not everybody will be able to make it. Okay. Looks like about 40% or so are attending, and the remainder are not able to or don't know. Go ahead and close the poll. And let's kind of take a different tact on this in terms of last polling question. What you know now about MAP-21, how would you forecast MAP-21's effect on TDM? Using a weather analogy. thinking about this one. Everybody's trying to figure out what's partly sunny versus partly cloudy. Doesn't matter. So okay, you can get an idea that most people think it's either partly sunny or partly cloudy. This might be the half full, half empty crowd right here. It is kind of normally distributed here with a few on either ends and turning a few at the head for the shelter. So all right. With that, let me, without any further ado, let me turn it over to Jason. And Jason, it's all yours.
Wonderful. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to such a large group, especially for many of you who will not be able to attend the ACT conference. For those of you who will be attending the ACT conference, there will be a number of sessions on this topic in more detail occurring throughout the ACT conference, both Monday and Tuesday. Let me start off by saying this is a 600-page bill, something in that neighborhood, and it'd be easy to try to skim through all of it in an hour and 15 minutes, but want to just touch on some of the high points, and as there are questions perhaps about other sections that I do not cover, or parts that I do not cover about the sections that I'm talking about, please feel free to ask those in the question and answer. Then, as always, if there are any other questions you may have about the program that may not specifically have a TDM focus, I have read this bill several times and hopefully can be able to answer it for you. So if you don't want to ask something not TDM related on this call, feel free to either email me or call me, and I'll do what I can to help find an answer to your question. The agenda is quite extensive. I want to get in a little bit of how MAP-21 became a law. I want to talk about MAP-21, the name of the transportation bill, in broad terms, and then get into a number of areas that have a direct impact on TDM, specifically the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, the National Goals and Performance Measures, the Transportation Alternatives Program, investment in van pooling, the Transportation Fringe Benefit, some changes in definitions, as well as a section on tolling and HOV. How MAP-21 became law. And if you would have asked me June 10th whether I thought Congress would have been able to complete a transportation bill by the end of June, I would have told you you were crazy and there was a 1 in 100 chance that it would have happened. The public policy call in June, those were actually the words I used. But I did have a caveat in the sense that anytime the House passes a bill and the Senate passes a bill, you are one mistake away from an idea becoming law. And that's basically what happened in MAP-21. There was such pressure put on by a variety of different entities, Senator Boxer and Congressman Micah, and in turn Congress, to pass a transportation bill that they did just that. Looking at where they were, looking into June, the House of Representatives had a 3-month extension of existing law as their opening bargaining piece. Provisions which would reduce red tape and project planning, formerly known as streamlining. The Keystone XL pipeline was a part of their 3-month extension. A provision related to coal ash. And it's of note that they did not actually pass their own transportation bill, H.R. 7, which was a 5-year bill. So the House bargaining position was essentially a shell. The Senate, however, passed a 14-month jobs bill that was entitled for job creation. It had a number of programmatic reforms and was bipartisan in nature, with over 3/4 of the Senate voting for the package. Basically, for 2 months, the House and Senate read the bill, and it seemed as though there was no momentum moving towards passage of a bill. However, there was a lot of pressure that Senate Democrats felt that they needed to do something and that they wanted to pass the transportation bill at all costs. Therefore, Republicans were able to said that they felt they needed to pass a bill too, so they couldn't be able to do nothing in Congress. So Republicans decided that they would drop their demand for the Keystone Pipeline and coal ash in return for the Democrats allowing the House's environmental streamlining provision and many of the provisions included in the transportation bill that the House never passed. This was rather unprecedented. It's ironic that the first time the House passed the transportation bill was actually the conference report that they passed. So essentially, it was, in effect, a compromise. From an editorial note, I believe that the House probably got a lot more than the Senate got, in the sense that the Keystone Pipeline is going to be built. It's just a matter of drawing a new map and routing it through Nebraska in a way that doesn't affect as environmentally sensitive areas. And I can tell you that from a policy perspective, the final product, MAP-21, looked much more like H.R. 7, the original House Transportation Bill, than it did the Senate bill. And for TDM purposes, I think that had some positives and some negatives, and we'll get into that later. I will tell you that when the bill originally passed back in June, there was a lot of folks, a lot of our colleagues in the world who looked and said it's not just storming outside, but a hurricane is hitting us. There were a variety of provisions in the legislation that at first look seemed to be the end of the world, that the House had won, and that many of the things that the Senate, and moreover, some of the words I was hearing, is that 50 years of progressiveness towards transportation had been undone in one fell swoop. But upon further reading of MAP-21, while from a broader standpoint, there's a lot of things in this bill not to like, there are a lot of things to build from this. And it was reminded me of an old Winston Churchill quote, that success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts. And I think that's where we're at. I can tell you from a TDM perspective, this bill is actually relatively positive. If I had to characterize it a certain way, and we'll get into the details on this, but I think it's got a lot of the, if a transportation bill is a car, we'll use a nice metaphor. I think this car has all the stickers, all the paint, all the things we wanted on it, but the motor isn't as great as we'd like it to be. Said differently, there's a lot of things to like about this, but there are some serious concerns about the overarching bill that provide, I think, hold me back from saying this was a complete successful act. But before we get into that, let me just give you a real quick, brief overview of the bill. First of all, it's a 2-year piece of legislation that covers FY13 and FY14. MAP-21 does not take effect until October 1st, 2012. That's the beginning of FY13. Until then, safety lieu is existing law. So all the policy changes that were made that affect TDM, none of those take effect until October 1st. And I can tell you, having talked to DOT as early as, or as late as this afternoon, that they are not going to make exceptions to allow certain things to happen before October 1st. The legislation makes significant changes to project planning process, allow projects to be completed quicker. If you talk to somebody who's supportive of environmental policy, they will say that the changes to the planning process, the NEPA planning process, take us back to a time when there were no seat belts and Elvis was still alive. I can say that it's not that stark, but certainly there are a number of environmental provisions in the project planning process that were stripped. We're not going to get into those today, but if someone has questions about those, I'd be more than happy to answer them offline. Also, funding is flat over 2 years. The bill will be $105 billion over 2 years. And it also increases the capitalization of the TIFIA program, which allows more projects to receive TIFIA loans. This generally doesn't impact the TDM world. Most TIFIA projects are large capital construction projects. However, as some TDM projects get wrapped into larger capital construction projects, this does promulgate and expand the ability for states and metropolitan planning organizations to look at capitalizing on a lot of these projects. It also should be noted that, quite frankly, TIFIA is a loan program. So generally speaking, when you use TIFIA funds, you are building some sort of tolled or some sort of priced facility. And obviously, as there are more priced facilities, there's the expansion of HOV and hot lanes, and in turn incentives for people to utilize something other than a single occupancy vehicle. So there is that indirect impact there. You see the overall funding levels for the two programs. The 80-20 split is between highways and transit is maintained. All of the funding is guaranteed. Although the pay for does not come from the highway trust or from the gas tax, there's a transfer of about $12 billion from the general trust fund into the highway trust fund, and that really doesn't mean anything for our purposes other than when we look at the next bill, the highway trust fund will probably only be able to, the gas taxes that you and I pay, will probably only be able to pay for about 75% of the overall transportation funding if it's kept at a flat line level. They had to infuse about 10% of the overall program for this bill from the general fund, and it really was the reason why this bill was held up for so long. One of the other major facets of this bill is it consolidates over 100 federal highway and transit programs into just a handful of programs. For the most part, I think the programs that ACT members utilized remained unscathed. There were a handful of programs that were eliminated. The $15 million a year value pricing pilot program that has helped start some innovative projects across the country was eliminated. The enhancements, recreational trails, and safe routes to school program were consolidated into one program called Transportation Alternatives, and I'll discuss that further in a moment. Also, the federal transit programs, several of them were eliminated and consolidated. The Clean Fuels Grants program was eliminated. The Job Access Reverse Commute and New Freedom program were consolidated, and then the Transit in the Parks program was also eliminated through this process. Taking a look here, you can see, these are all of the remaining federal highway programs. When you consider that this list once would have taken about 15 slides, there are now just a handful of programs that remain. I will tell you that you'll note the one program that I'm very happy to see remains is the CMAC program that will fund a lot of programs. Also, TDM projects are eligible through the Surface Transportation Program and the National Highway Performance Program, although most funding will come from the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program. It should also be noted that Transportation Alternatives is also a program that will fund some TDM-type activities. Here are your federal transit programs, again, narrowed down. We'll not be getting into much detail about these programs. For the most part, the programs have remained the same. The money is sent out a little bit differently. One noticeable change is the 5309 Bus Facility Program, which traditionally had been earmarked, both through the transportation bill and through appropriation bills, was eliminated. That funding was sent to different programs, specifically through the State of Good Repair Program, which is how DOT was using most of the funds from the Bus Facility Program in the last few years without earmarks. I want to get into some of the specifics on some of the programs. First and foremost, the CMAC program. There were a lot of changes within CMAC. Many of them, I think, positive for the TDM world, some of them not so great. I think some of them pose challenges for our industry. First of all, starting in FY13, all CMAC projects will require a 20% local match. For the past several years, there was a special provision that said certain projects were eligible at 100% federal dollars. That has now changed. That provision was not renewed. Instead, now all CMAC projects will require a 20% local match like other highway projects. Eligibility was redefined. In the past, most of the things that ACT members do and the TDM world does were eligible through because they were known as transportation control measures. They're eligible because the EPA said they reduced congestion and they improved air quality. What that led was some confusion and some problems in how the regulations for those projects were applied in different locations. In some cases, what was considered, rideshare matching was considered marketing, and then subject to certain limitations. So we were able to specifically outline and identify in U.S. code, which is law, which is stronger than regulations, telecommuting, ride-sharing, car-sharing, alternative work hours, and pricing projects. They were all specifically made eligible. One notation I will make is that while it's congressional intent and our intentions that any type of project attributed to those types of projects, whether it be capital or operating, should be eligible without condition, specifically without having a 3-year limit. I will not feel comfortable until the Department of Transportation issues guidance and rulemaking on CMAC that clearly stipulates that these projects and what types of projects and what each of these projects encompasses. It's, again, my intent to make the program broad enough that everything you all do and would like to do with CMAC money is eligible, but at the same time do not want to open the door for projects that aren't necessarily good projects to be allowed vis-a-vis entities that want to claim that certain things are telework when they're really just buying cell phones for 150 city employees or something along those lines. We want to make sure that the guidance is thorough enough to avoid bad projects. Capacity prohibition. The CMAC maintains prohibition against using CMAC for capacity expansion. I will tell you that this was a change at literally, I don't even want to say the 11th hour. This was like 11:59 and 30 seconds. The original conference report was released at about 4 in the morning East Coast time, and it actually, the original draft of the conference report allowed for CMAC dollars to be used for capacity expansion, meaning states could use CMAC dollars to build highway lanes if they could prove or show that it reduced air quality impacts. And I can tell you that state DOTs know how to make models do just about anything they want them to. So that was something that was reinserted literally at the last minute. It also provides states some flexibility. If a state does not or never has had an area designated for non-attainment, they may use CMAC programs for any project eligible under the STP program. For the most part, and I've looked at this, most of the states that TDM, there's a prevalence of TDM in, very few of them come from a state where there has been or never, there isn't or never has been an area designated for non-attainment. Even a state like Florida, which at this point I think the entire state is in attainment for O2, for ozone, it wasn't in non-attainment, or it was in non-attainment in the past. Many of the areas are in maintenance. So as long as the state has had one area at some point in non-attainment for either PM 2.5, particulate matter, or ozone, it must continue to use CMAC funds for the purposes outlined in CMAC. There's probably 6 or 7 states that are outside of this. State allocations, states will receive the same amount of proportional amount of CMAC funds in FY13 and 14 as they did in 09. So if California received 15% of the total CMAC dollars in FY09, that's what they're going to get in FY13 and FY14. There are state charts, and they're available at actweb.org, and there's a link to that at the end of this presentation for those who are curious what their state will receive in CMAC dollars. Another issue I think that is both good and bad for ACT members is that CMAC dollars may now be used for operating assistance for transit projects. So for many of the shuttles and many of the folks who I've talked to in the TDM world who have operated shuttles using CMAC dollars and then had to cease use of those funds after 3 years, good news, you can start to use CMAC dollars again. The bad news is that where there are operating deficiencies across the country at transit systems, CMAC may become a funding pot for those deficiencies. However, there are provisions later on in this section that I'll talk about that I hope will prevent CMAC from basically becoming a transit operating slush fund. Additionally, MPOs may conduct a technical assessment of a selected program of projects, and as long as the whole program of projects shows that there is a reduction in air quality emission reductions, then the whole program is approved. I look at this 2 ways until I hear from DOT, until DOT responds to this. I think it can go 1 of 2 ways. Usually with CMAC dollars, if you have a rideshare program or some sort of diesel retrofit program that receives multiple years of funding, you have to show emission reductions each year. And it's something you have to go back and prove every year to the state DOT and then back to the Federal Highway Regional Office. I don't know whether that says if a rideshare program in Tampa is shown to reduce emissions in year 1, it's assumed that it'll reduce emissions in year 2 and year 3, or if it's saying, you know, hey, Tampa's got a rideshare program, it's got some transit operating, it's got a diesel retrofit program and some signalization, and we've looked at all this along a corridor, and all these solutions together reduce emissions X amount, then saying if the rideshare is the only one that has any real impact because you've grouped the other projects together, they're approved. I don't know if it's, in that sense, if the optional programmatic eligibility is vertical or up and down, up and down or side to side. So it's something that obviously I failed geometry as a student. It's something that we're looking into and we're asking. And the congressional intent wasn't known. I remember talking to folks about this. It didn't come up. Performance plan. This is something very exciting. I think this is something that ACT actually helped develop, and I think will be a great thing for us for the TDM world. If you remember a few minutes ago when I mentioned that there were some things built into CMAC that hopefully will prevent an operating CMAC becoming an operating slush fund. This is it. It's a performance plan. Each metropolitan planning organization, over 1 million people representing a non-attainment or maintenance area, is required to develop a performance plan that is separate from their existing planning process. What the plan must do is identify an area of baseline level of traffic congestion and on-road mobile source emissions. And I think it is important to note that the keyword traffic congestion. CMAC has so long been about mobile source emissions. I think it's important that the performance plan also recognizes traffic congestion. The report must also include a description of progress made in achieving performance targets established by MAP21, and I'll get into that in a moment, and then a description of projects identified for funding and how the projects will contribute to achieving emission congestion reduction. These performance plans need to be updated every 2 years and include a separate report that assesses the progress of the previous plan. So no longer can states spend CMAC dollars and not report on it. They have to plan, and then they have to review what their plan got them and what their dollars got them. TDM projects routinely rank as some of the most cost-effective and some of the most effective ways to reduce emissions. By states and MPOs having to look and do a performance plan, I really truly believe that many of the ineffective projects that states and MPOs initiate with their CMAC dollars will go away, and that they're going to need to basically perform better. And there's also other parts of this program that will talk about performance plan that will talk about that back this up. But it is, I think, of note that something that if you're an MPO you may not want to do because it is more work, a lot more work. It's a new facet of the process. but I think from our perspective in the TDM world, we're hoping that the cream will rise to the top as a result of this provision. Also, finally on CMAC, not finally, there's a couple more, but there's also a set-aside for PM 2.5, that's particulate matter. States with areas of non-attainment for 2.5 must give priority to diesel retrofit projects. For those states, 25% of their CMAC funds are set aside for these types of diesel retrofit projects. Here's the note. We are unsure if it's 25% of a state's total CMAC allocation or 25% of the portion that states get from the populations living in a 2.5 weighted area. It's a large difference in how much is set aside. It's my opinion, reading the legislative text, that it was intended to be 25% of the amount generated from the population living in an area of 2.5, but the language as written was sloppy and could lead to either or, and we're talking about a difference of whether it's $500 million a year versus, $25 to $50 million a year. And in many areas where, a state, for example, especially Connecticut, for example, where only one of the counties, or an area where only one of the counties is non-attainment for PM 2.5, and the rest of the state is in, non-attainment for ozone, it seems rather ridiculous that that state would have to spend 25% of their CMAC dollars to take care of what is essentially a very small problem in that state. But that is something that we are looking into and looking to have addressed, and hopefully have an answer sooner rather than later. Just a couple other things about CMAC. It requires DOT and EPA to perform an outcomes of projects under CMAC to research the emissions reductions and traffic reductions of different types of projects, and then provide a chart and a table that looks at cost effectiveness and effectiveness of different projects. It's similar to what was done about 10 years ago, and they had to update that every 2 years. Here, as actually the state apportionments based off a contract authority for the different years. Again, this is going to be on the PowerPoint. It's also on ACT's website, so I will not stay on that for too long. CMAC, bottom line, increased flexibility for TDM, but more competition. There's increased focus on performance and performance metrics. At the ACT Public Policy Council this Tuesday afternoon at its legislative conference, we'll begin to discuss recommendations on regulations and rulemaking that we hope to make to to the administration. One thing I did not mention, but it's a separate part of the provision, states may flex up to 50% of any federal program to another federal program. This is something that in the past has been uncapped, but now it's capped. This is something that's happened before, where states routinely will under-obligate or underspend one program and then overspend another, basically using budgetary gimmicks that I'm not going to get into right now. MAP-21 limits the ability of states to do this flexing to 50% of the CMAC program. I think it's a lot higher than most states will do, but they do have the option to do that. Next kind of section, national goals and performance measures. This is something that ACT worked a lot on and will continue to work with. The Secretary is required to establish performance measures and standards within 18 months of the passage of MAP-21. The deadline for that is January 6, 2014. I can tell you with a lot of certainty or a lot of hope that this administration will actually have initial rulemaking completed much sooner than 18 months. I think they will actually have something out to the public in the next 3. The legislation specifically limits the rulemaking process by section, and I will get into that here real briefly. The National Highway Performance Program, which is the catch-all highway program, requires minimum standards for the developing and operating bridge and pave management, and also minimal levels of condition for pavement and condition of bridges. This is a very engineering type look at performance. However, it does require states or DOT to promulgate rules about the performance of the interstate and the national highway system. So flow of traffic, and that's something that we will be commenting on. And there's parts of that program that we're not going to get into today, but I think are positive for our purposes, where states are required to monitor, report, and improve on the condition and performance of their systems, and if they don't, federal dollars are withheld or transferred to separate programs. So I think this is something that really is more long-term than it is anything else, but I believe it'll begin to change the way that state DOTs and certain effects metropolitan planning organizations plan on how they spend their federal dollars, and will focus more on performance. And I think that helps TDM in the long run. The Secretary does have the authority to recognize in this rulemaking that different regions suffer from different geographic challenges. In Florida, where you have a hurricane, once every 3 months down there, and then in certain months, certain years, the roads don't exactly fare as well as they do in Kansas, where it's hot and sunny all day. So that there is a recognition that conditions of roads change based on geography, and the Secretary has the ability to do that. They also have performance measures for Highway Safety Improvement Program, looking at serious injuries and fatalities per vehicle mile traveled, the number of serious injuries and fatalities. For CMAC, it's, again, part of that meant they need to create congestion measures and on-road mobile source emissions. We will particularly want to comment on what is considered traffic congestion. Are we talking about the number of vehicles or the number of people? And that's something that is certainly something we'll be talking about at the ACT conference. And also national freight movement is something that will be dealt with. So I'm not going to read through all this, but this is basically the timeline that has been set out in some of the conditions. Not less than a year after the Secretary issued the rule, each state's required to set performance targets, and then they have to report on those targets 4 years after the beginning of the bill, and then every 2 years. And I think it really, again, puts a focus on short and long-term planning. Moving on to the Transportation Alternatives Program. MAP-21 consolidates transportation enhancements, which was originally a part of the Surface Transportation Program, the Recreational Trails Program, and the Safe Routes to School Program, into a new and separate program. This isn't a set-aside of any type of money. It's its own separate program. When you look at consolidating the programs, the total amount of funding spent on these programs is cut by about 25%. In FY11, the 3 programs listed totaled about $1.2 billion. The allocation for transportation alternatives in FY13 is $808 million. Additionally, states are required to spend a minimum amount of these funds on recreational trail projects unless the governor requests a waiver 1 month before the funds are allocated. That usually happens about this time. We're about a month out from federal dollars being allocated. A couple of other caveats, both positive and negative. When funds are apportioned to a state, half of the states must be spent in urbanized areas. The other half is spent at the state's discretion. Long story short, half of the Transportation Alternatives Program money, about $404 million of it, will be sub-allocated directly to MPOs for their decision on what projects to pick and choose. For the metro part of the program, the state and the relevant MPO must conduct a competitive process open to a wide variety of entities. Something to be said here. One of the compromises made was that, well, let me actually get into this part. The MPO has power to select projects. States may transfer to the STP program any transportation alternatives funding that remains unused after 1 year and 10 months. The fear was, before we got the second bullet I'll talk about, the fear was that if you allow states to transfer the transportation alternatives funding, basically they'll sit on it and say, you know what, we couldn't find good projects for it. Kind of like some states do with the CMAC program. So one of the conditions was that before a state could return any of the transportation alternatives money, they had to have an open and competitive process for transportation alternatives, meaning that it's not like they can hide the money and pretend like it's not there. They have to announce the availability of the funding and hold a competition for it. So that basically assures that all of the dollars, all $404 that is sub-allocated to the metro level, will get spent. The state, though, does not have to do that with their portion, so states hypothetically could sit on half of the money, wait 1 year and 10 months, and then transfer it over to the STP program. This is something that Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma demanded. They wanted the flexibility to say that we don't need to build sidewalks and bike trails in Oklahoma, we need to build more highways. This bill gives them that flexibility. Again, for the most part, most staff members and most folks in the TDM world come from states where there isn't that problem, where states don't want to spend this money. In fact, there's usually an abundance of the eligible part of projects. Moving on quickly to the federal transit portion of the legislation. One of the provisions that ACT was able to include in the legislation was language that would allow public sector agencies who contract for van pool service, they can use passenger fare revenue as a source of local match for creation and expansion of van pool program. For local governments that manage their own programs and buy their own vehicles, they are not eligible to participate under this section. It's only for those areas that contract their van pool service. Basically, this program eliminates the need for local match for projects looking to start or expand. The provision is expected to double van pooling within the next 5 years. This is one of the fundamental problems has been to start and expand van pool programs has been the lack of federal dollars. The lack of local match. Broadly speaking, types of entities that engage in van pool programs are regional bodies. They are bodies that do not have access to a local tax source. So they are reliant upon local governments and the state to provide local match for any type of subsidized van pool program. This provision eliminates that need because the riders themselves can essentially cover the local match. In short, this will allow local governments that don't subsidize their van pool programs to bring the amount, the overall price to the consumer, to the rider, down by a significant amount. In some cases, 40%. Something that, again, worked for, was able to achieve, and we hope you all will take advantage of it. Moving on, the transportation fringe benefit. I think the greatest negative of this bill. The cap remains at $125 for transit and van pooling and $240 for parking. We are using ongoing efforts to increase the cap as part of the tax extenders discussion. That is something that we will cover at length at the Tuesday morning session at the ACT conference. I don't want to get in too off record right now on the provision on the tax extenders. I will say this: the provision was in the Senate bill, and there were no less than 15 Republicans who went and spoke to leadership about including it in the transportation bill. House Republican leadership decided they did not want to have it in the bill. Their official response was they did not want to have anything unrelated to the Highway Trust Fund or spending dollars on the transportation bill. I've got some conspiracy theories as to what happened. Many of them are founded. Some of them are just conspiracy theories. If you want to hear some of them, we can talk at the conference. Long story short, it was not included, and it's incredibly disappointing, but our efforts will be ongoing to include this as a part of the tax extenders discussion. I will say that it is highly unlikely that parity will be established until the end of this year. So I would say that for those who are getting questions, when will this change, nothing is definitive, but I would not expect anything to change until January 1st of 2013. Something to also keep in mind, Congress is considering and talking about reforming the entire tax code because it's gotten a little too complicated. Within that, there becomes the very real possibility that Congress could eliminate both the parking and transit benefit. As much as I want parity, I don't want it at zero. I think the transit benefit has been a phenomenal tool for TDM agencies to promote employers getting involved and promote transit ridership. I think you all will agree. So we're actually going to be spending the next few months here doing what we can to collect stories and anecdotes on how the transit benefit has helped a variety of different items. And again, we'll be talking about that at the ACT conference on Tuesday morning. Definitely not going to read this, but there were also a handful of changes in definitions in the U.S. Code. And while that doesn't seem all that remarkable, it does affect things like eligibility within certain programs. You will see that Congress decided to create a definition of what transportation management operations is. You will see highlighted and underlined a number of TDM-type activities that are listed either directly or indirectly within this. So you are firmly considered a transportation management operations, which opens you up to really funding eligibility within all of the federal highway projects. Another change in definition is in real-time ride-sharing. The definition of carpool project was amended to include real-time and dynamic ride-sharing projects, where the drivers receive some sort of compensation for sharing his or her vehicle, as long as that compensation does not exceed the cost of the trip. This change was made to at ACT's leadership to keep in mind that there have been a number of different companies out there, a number of different arrangements where drivers receive some sort of compensation, either through iPhone apps, through things like New Ride and things like that. This provision was made just to expand the definition of carpool project, more so to identify what they are, and also I think in terms of as innovation grows, certain things like is this considered a taxi cab operation? If carpool drivers are paid, are they essentially taxi cab and then commercial drivers, and thus subject to certain things like CDL requirements, things like that? Well, defining these things in federal code doesn't necessarily solve local problems. It does preempt and prevent indirect and unintended consequences at the federal level. And I also think it gives local governments some guidance as to what is the difference between a taxi cab service and some sort of compensation for carpool drivers and things of that nature. Moving on, tolling and HOV, MAP-21 gives states the authority to convert existing HOV lanes into high-occupancy toll lanes, but the language specifically prevents states from charging HOVs a toll. That is an important point that we were able to get in. A lot of states were coming to DOT saying we don't want to give anyone special treatment. If we turn an HOV lane into a hot lane, it's just easier for us to toll everybody. We were able to get Congress to say, nope, if you're built an HOV lane and you want to put some tolled vehicles on it, have at it, but you're not going to toll HOV vehicles. And that, I think, is the critical provision in the legislation. So, now that I've put you all to sleep, let me just go into some of the summaries. Positives. CMAC survives. At one point, that was not a given. CMAC, there's a performance plan. The cream will rise to the top. Projects like yours, I expect to be funded at a much higher rate than previously. We're going to get eligibility clarified and expanded throughout all of the federal programs, but most specifically within CMAC. Performance measures are included throughout the bill. Again, I think states have to look at the performance of their system, and states have to look at such things as throughput and congestion. I think they look to you because you are the cheapest option to fixing those programs. The investment in van pools provision is another positive. If we can double van pooling in this country over the next 5 years, I think we'll make a real impact nationwide. Negatives, flat funding. We're not seeing any additional funding. We're seeing the same level. That makes it tough for new things to be done. I think the elimination of the value pricing program, while a small program at only $15 million a year, I think it gave birth to many of the different types of projects I just mentioned in the real-time ride-sharing, such things as also as flexible insurance, pay-as-you-drive insurance, parking management. There's a lot of great projects that started in the value pricing program and have now become, national type projects. So I'm very excited to see that go. Obviously, the consolidation of the TE program, Safe Routes to School and Rec Trails, into a smaller transportation alternatives program, I think causes some consternation. Again, no increase in the transit benefit and increased competition within CMAC are some of the largest negatives I see from this bill. In my opinion, for those of you who said it was partly sunny out, that's where I'm leaning. Again, I think there's a lot of positives in this bill. There are some negatives, and there are some overarching concerns that I have at 35,000 feet about the status of the Highway Trust Fund, about flat funding and things of that nature. That being said, I think there were a lot of positive changes within this bill that should make it easier to direct more of the existing funding towards TDM projects and provides you all the flexibility I think you need to do the jobs you're doing. Moving forward, I think there's a couple of things that we need from you, and we being myself and other advocates in the field outside of ACT. First of all, there is an increased focus on performance. Hopefully you all will keep ACT in the loop on examples of how to trumpet successes and identify challenges with the performance process, with the performance of your projects, and also with how things are implemented. That's important to keep an eye on. I think it's very, very important that you all keep us in the loop on, where there's intent in Congress not being necessarily, performed in the field. That's important for us to know. One, we might be able to fix it. Two, it might require a fix in the actual language itself. ACT needs to weigh in on the performance measures. I think a lot of the positives we see from this bill stem from the fact that there is going to be increased focus on performance. We need to make sure that that's a solid look at performance and that it's not a check-the-box exercise for state DOTs and other entities. Finally, we need to push for open guidance and rulemaking. There are those who believe that the only way that the DOT is going to push through a lot of things they need to push through is by opting instead of for guidance and rulemaking processes to instead use what they call Q&As, which are just question and answers, and memorandums to recipients of federal dollars giving their opinion. That doesn't provide for a very open process, and I think often provides for confusion and things of that nature. So we want to, as an industry, I think, push to make sure that as this law is implemented and executed, that the rules and guidance behind it are formed in a way that's open for comment and things of that nature. And that's something that I think we will be asking for in the very near future. I did what I could in 45 minutes to go over the high points. Again, I hope I didn't put many of you to sleep and you found this interesting. ACT is putting together a MAP21 Resource Center. We will be populating that with things as we generate them, and in addition, as they come up. It will include links to federal highways, FTA, which will is changing things and adding things daily, and additionally stuff, primers that are specifically geared for ACT members that summarize what we talked about in a little bit more detail and provides another level of detail. All of that is included at the MAP21 Resource Center for ACT, and I will be adding things, and we will be adding things there quite often, especially over the next few weeks here. We will also use that portal to announce regulations and things of that nature. So with that, I will throw it back to Phil.
Great, thank you, Jason, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions coming in, and I'll put a reminder up on the screen of how you can submit your questions. Click the Q&A at the top. I know that one question that's come in a couple times already is, can I get a copy of the slides? And I failed to mention that, yes, you can. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you should see an icon that looks like 3 sheets of paper. You click on that, and you can download a PDF copy of Jason's slides. It will be today's meeting has been recorded and will be available for playback by Friday, and it will also include a link to a PDF copy of today's slides. And so with that, there's two ways of asking questions. You can submit it that way, or if you prefer, you can direct your questions via phone by hitting *8, and we will it signals to us that you have a question you want to ask via phone, and we'll open your line and let you ask it. And please limit it to one question. Thank you. Prefer to have you do it this way. But okay, they're coming in fast and furious now, Jason. So let's get started. It said one question was, I thought ride sharing was always eligible under CMAC. It's kind of a comment.
It is, and it has been. However, it was eligible under what is considered a transportation control measure. So that is something that it was eligible through guidance, meaning that it was not explicitly eligible, it was indirectly eligible. And what that has meant is that certain aspects of rideshare projects have been deemed capital, certain have been deemed operating, certain have been deemed unallowed. Subsidies in some cases, where you give an employee a $50 gift card for, and quite frankly, the problem has been it's varied by state to state on what a region considers eligible and what it considers ineligible, because the guidance has been, I don't want to say relatively vague, but it's certainly not definitive. What we wanted to do was to make all of those items specifically eligible through code, so that it strengthens the eligibility, and hopefully when when given the benefit of the doubt, it'll benefit on the side of a project being eligible rather than err on the side of, well, this really isn't eligible because it's not explicitly allowed within within the code. So that is kind of where the thinking was. But yeah, it's a clarification, and if you're asking that question, it probably means you haven't had that problem. But I know there's a lot of folks, I'm just seeing on the attendance list on the phone here, who have had quite a few problems with getting certain CMAC ride-sharing projects made eligible through CMAC dollars.
Okay. Another question was about, what about smaller MPOs regarding, I guess, the performance plans?
In terms of the CMAC performance plan, they do not have to perform one. However, reverting back to performance measures that a state has to do, which is a separate section, they have to set congestion reduction targets and air quality emission reduction targets. That goes for all states too. That's not just in the state. That's not just for states that are in non-attainment areas. That's for every state in the union. For CMAC performance plans that they have to plan on how to use their CMAC dollars, it's only for MPOs that are $1 million or higher. A lot of times, smaller MPOs take it upon themselves to want to behave like their bigger brothers. Not to diminish anyone that comes from small MPOs. I think some of the best projects come from some of the MPOs, smaller MPOs. But there's nothing preventing them from doing it, but it is only a requirement of $1 million or more.
Okay. All right, we have a question via the phone from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm going to move you to two-way and go ahead and ask your question, Michigan. Go ahead.
Hi, I was wondering if any provisions have been made in CMAC for operations of bike share programs and eligibility.
No. It's an interesting question, and probably one of the ones we probably could have done a better job answering. One of the actual language itself, as it's listed, let me find it here. Car sharing is eligible, and while I know you said bike sharing, it is something to keep in mind that at least it's in the neighborhood. The language itself says that as long as just bear with me 2 more seconds here. If the project or program shifts traffic demand to non-peak hours or other transportation modes, increases vehicle occupancy rates, or otherwise reduces demand for roads, is the language, and then it goes through such means. So I have just wrote down bike sharing, and I'll make sure that when they write the regulations that that they include those means to be bike sharing, but again, because it's not through code, you might fall into the same problem that we have. That being said, I know Washington, D.C., I should say I know, I'm pretty sure Washington, D.C. used CMAC funds for its bike share program, and I know it's not an uncommon thing to do. So I would simply say I think it's not explicitly eligible, but again, I think there's enough language in there that if you've had a problem, it should hopefully ease up any resistance that a state DOT has.
Okay. We have several more questions. We'll try to get them all in by the next 15 minutes here. The next one is, how do CMAC changes affect multi-year grants that have already been awarded?
From what I understand, that anything awarded prior to October 1st will continue to be funded under the existing law, under safety lieu. There was nothing changed that would restrict eligibility, so I don't know if there would be a negative impact. For example, let's say a multi-year contract had funding leak in FY14, FY15, or FY13, FY14. There's nothing in there that restricts eligibility, so you shouldn't have a problem. And quite frankly, there might be a couple of, I wouldn't be surprised if there are CMAC projects that have the potential for multi-year funding to get extended or expanded if they have shown to reduce emission reductions, just to help get to that, to group in other projects that may not, be as good and kind of up the overall performance of the program. I mean, keep in mind, folks, TDM projects are going to be a lot more popular because you are so successful. States are going to be able to use you and say, well, if I need to reduce emissions by 10 and TDM does it by 9, I can, fund the other 7 projects that reduce emission reductions by 0.1 and still get to my 10 number. So you're gonna be the one everyone wants to go on a date with. I don't know anything about going on dates with people.
Okay, Jason. On the kind of the HOT issue, and related to converting HOV to HOT, but not charging HOVs a toll, does it indicate occupancy threshold for HOVs, or does it leave it to the states to determine?
HOV2. Actually, it specifically says at least HOV2. Let me verify that while you're asking the next question.
Okay.
I have the Bible in front of me, MAP21.
And then the next question will be, which office at US DOT will be developing the performance standards that impact CMAC?
The Office of the Secretary, from what I've been told. I will tell you that the Office of the Secretary will be in charge of a lot of these initiatives. I think a lot of it will eventually, the nitty-gritty will be done at the administrative level, but I can tell you that knowing the individuals firsthand, personally knowing the individuals who are in the policy office, this is what they came to work at DOT for, to help write these rules and regulations. So I can tell you that nothing will get put into circulation without the Office of the Secretary and the policy office having direct control over it in some way, shape, or form.
Another question is, how do we know our program is still eligible under CMAC? What if my program does more than just telecommuting, ride-sharing, car sharing, and alternate work hours? What if my program focuses a lot on increasing transit ridership?
It should still absolutely be eligible under what a term known as mobility management. Again, there was no real restriction or reduction of eligibility within the CMAC program. There's no reason for me to believe that an agency will, that Federal Highways will disallow those types of projects. In fact, transit, while not explicitly, mentioned in this, I think you can safely say that promotional programs that get people on buses and rail certainly reduce peak hour congestion. So I don't think you'll have a problem, and I would not fret at all that anything you're currently doing with CMAC dollars will stop. And if it does, let me know, because I can certainly look into that. And regarding the question about HOV lanes, I'm quite certain it's 2. 99% sure they set it at 2. HOV 2. Yeah, here it is, HOV 2.
All right. To clarify what you said about the van pool element was municipal, regional, statewide, and public sector van pool programs cannot use passenger revenue to create or expand their programs, but if they contract to a private operator and the private vendor can use those fares?
Well, let me be clear. All the power is within the local governments. Under existing law right now, today, the federal government or local agencies cannot use passenger revenue as local match. So if, I don't know, T-BARTA, where you're from, I keep on picking on Phil, and I'm pretty sure Sandy's on the phone. If T-BARTA contracts with Enterprise and VPSI and any of the other providers, under existing law, they cannot use passenger fare revenue as local match. They have to have it through some sort of other local source, real estate taxes, gas taxes, what have you. What this law is saying, what this change in law is saying is that T-BARTA, or whoever the local entity is, if they are contracting with a private provider, that private vehicle can be used as local match, and then they can recoup the local match through passenger revenue, which is the long way of saying what the provision does. So, long story short, local governments, when contracting with a private provider, can use, under the capital cost of contracting policy, can use passenger fare revenue exceeding operating costs as local match. So if it costs $750 to operate that van, they can collect $900 and use $150 as local match on that van.
Okay.
And this will be talked about in much more detail at the ACT conference as well, and we're going to be actively putting together a primer on this provision if you have any questions.
Okay. In the CMAC program, do you consider the provision on operating assistance to apply to ride-sharing operating costs? That is, will ride-sharing program operations be eligible for CMAC funding? It doesn't seem that clear in the language.
It doesn't, but I think because it's specifically made existing eligible through the code, that ride-sharing is an eligible expense. The interpretation, the congressional intent is that operating and capital costs are eligible. The code does not restrict that. And if you recall, the prohibition against three-year operating is something that is regulatory-based, guidance-based. It is not statute. So it is our intent and the congressional intent, and we're going to back that congressional intent up with letters from the authors, that ride-sharing and all those items I listed are eligible as both capital and operating expenses.
Okay. Kind of going a little bit towards the carpooling, van pooling project eligibility, I believe under STP it was 100% funding. Does that still apply? I mean, you mentioned about CMAC being 80-20. Are carpool, van pool program projects eligible for 100% funding under other federal programs?
No, it's 80% everywhere.
Okay.
As I understand it, and I've got to keep in mind, I've got to go through, there's code change, the sections, certain sections affect other sections. although my reading of the bill, and I've got to go back through code and see what code has been changed and what code hasn't, put that all together again. It's my understanding that everything now is 80/20, and I've talked to folks at Federal Highway. They have told us that CMAC is, and I'm pretty sure that SDP, because I'm pretty sure when STP funds were being used to fund a carpool van pool program, they were being flexed over to CMAC as a way to make the project 100%. So I'm quite certain that it's 80/20 now everywhere for everything.
It's kind of a follow-up question to the. I'm sorry. Let me get to this one. It's different, a new category. You said that the value pricing pilot program has been eliminated. Are there areas where pricing projects will be funded, and what happens to the FHWA's Office on Pricing?
In terms of, there is still money that exists for at least the next 2 years. I will tell you that, that division is, in terms of Federal Highways, that division is part of the Office of the Operating Office. Our good friend Wayne Berman, who has long time been, a champion of the TDM world, before he got involved in pricing during the Bush administration, he was much more involved in some of the TDM, not saying he is now. It's a long way of saying, the pricing office really got established without federal statute. It got, established as an initiative of the Bush administration. So I don't expect that office to go anywhere, or more importantly, those people to go anywhere. And keep in mind, there is enhanced tolling authority in this bill, so they actually might be busier now. The only thing that really goes away is the pilot program, and the $15 million attributed to it. I will also say that the REDA, the research program, kind of gets folded back into the administrations a little bit more. So it's not out of the question that DOT may direct $10, $11, $12 million a year towards, research and evaluation of different pilot programs using research dollars. So there are options at the discretion of DOT, but there just won't be that sure $15 million a year grant program every year.
Okay. On the kind of the issue of allowing, I guess, transit agencies to use operating expenses, use funds for operating expenses, do you have any idea what percentage of transit agencies are facing operating deficits and will be competing with commuter assistance programs for CMAC dollars? And also, how big are these deficits?
I bet I know who asked that question. I do not. We're looking. It is one of the things I want to look into. I know just from talking some of the bigger areas, Boston, Philadelphia, San Jose. There's a lot of agencies that are facing some degree of operating deficiencies, based upon a variety of factors. There is Transportation for America has a map that is probably 18 months old, but I will certainly look into that and get an answer out. That is actually, I will have that map put on the ACT website just to give you an idea, as well as a look at the areas that are in PM 2.5. There's a map that I can put on, I'll add that to the ACT website as well.
Okay. Two more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. If the Carpool Van Pool program, say a multi-year project, is awarded at 100% under CMAC before October 1st, will it be funded at 100% for FY13 and FY14?
No, I would highly doubt it. And that is something that I need to get more clarification on, because it's just a matter of how you where the money comes from, what years the money comes from. Are they a situation where, the program, obligates FY12 money, and then it just spreads it out through 3 years? So you're asking a question, I think, without knowing, a lot more of the specifics, but I will say this, I think it's something that if it's a concern, I would do everything you can to get as much of the money obligated by FY12 or FY11 money to avoid running into that problem.
Okay. Another question is, are any states currently flexing STP funds to spend on TDM or active transportation? I.e., do we have any good examples of flexing in a positive direction?
Phil, you probably be better suited to answer than I am. Aren't you guys doing it down there in Florida?
There are organizations that are using STP funds for TDM. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to know which ones, I know. Florida does it. I would say. I'm pretty sure Alaska, ironically, uses some of their STP funds. Yeah, there are states that do it. Quite frankly, though, and I had this conversation with someone earlier today, CMAC has been under-obligated. States have only spent about 2/3 of their CMAC money. So, it's tough to say, oh, my God, there's no CMAC money when states haven't spent it all. Hopefully now we'll have this problem where we can come back and say, states aren't spending there's not enough, CMAC money and states don't have any. We need to increase, the CMAC pot, but that was one of the problems we had, quite frankly, getting the pot expanded, is that there's so many states turning back CMAC dollars, and we fixed some of the reasons why they would, but, it was a tough case to make. So, yeah, there are states. I don't know them all offhand.
Okay. And a final question. With the elimination of discretionary grants, what will be the effect on the, I guess it's really the transportation alternative category?
I'm sorry, say that again, Phil?
With the elimination of discretionary grants, what will be the effect on the alternative transportation category?
Everything will be done through formula. I mean, every kind of like enhancements was, everything is done through formulas. States will get the same proportion of transportation alternatives money that they would have if the programs had before. I think one of the negatives of this bill is there is no discretionary money. Now everything is, I think it's going to be lack of room for innovation. So I think there is, they certainly have taken any authority away from the Department of Transportation and the executive branch and restored everything back to the states. I think it's some negatives, I think, in terms of livability and stuff like that. More was done through discretionary grants than ever could have been done through formula grants, and I think that has led to an increase in spending on those activities through formula dollars. And I'll even, go back to the Bush administration and their, urban partnership program, did a lot of good for TDM and a variety of different types of pricing projects. So, I think it's going to have a negative impact.
Okay. Well, Jason, on behalf of all the attendees, thank you very much for a very thorough presentation of a, 500-page, 600-page document.
Something like that.
Those certainly that are attending next week's Association for Commuter Transportation Conference will have an opportunity to hear even more and ask more detailed questions in person or in the hallway of Jason and others. And again, as we said, a copy of the slides and the recording should be available on our www.nctr.usf.edu website. And I'm sure ACT will probably put the link on their website too. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today. And if you take a few minutes to complete the evaluation, we would greatly appreciate it. Until then, we'll see you next time. Have a good day. Bye.